Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at the LDARC 130 GTI HD, featuring the Caddx Turtle V2 for your HD and FPV camera, LDRC 1406 3600 kV motors, LDARC branded 3050 props that look like gem fans but they're not, F4 flight controller with an OSD running Betaflight 3.5.5, 40 channels 0 to 200 milliwatt power switchable VTX. The Bind 'em Fly version comes with the AC2000 receiver, which is SFHSS compatible along with D16 for EU and non-EU. The plastic housing has a multicolor LED as well as the buzzer. XT30 mounted to a PCB. This pad down here is foam, and this works to stop your battery from sliding out. Motor post to motor post, I am getting about 133 millimeters. Bottom plate's measuring 4 millimeters. Arms look like they're over 8 millimeters wide. The aluminum cage looks like it's 4 millimeters thick. It comes with this LDARC branded battery strap, but I use two thinner ones. We'll get into that later. Comes with a spare yellow canopy for some reason, an extra set of props, some TPU landing gear, a short manual on your receiver, another one in Chinese, and it all comes in a plastic box. So as we get into this flight, I think the first thing I need to talk about is this came with the tune and I felt it was kind of loose. And then I tried retuning it, and then I kind of find out why it's kind of loose. And the strange thing is, I think it has to do mainly with the props. I think these LDARC branded props, they're just not quite as good as the Gem Fan ones. So with this, I would recommend if you get this to replace them with genuine Gem Fan props. I've run these motors before, although it was on a much lighter machine, and they don't tune normally this hard. So I think it's this props. And you'll notice that it's kind of a swooping sort of flight. It's not my typical style because I just couldn't get the responsiveness out of it until I got the P's at a high enough point to where it started coming out in the video, especially the HD video. You get an HD quad because you want good video out of it, and the more I tuned it, the worse the video got. I got more chop and turns. Actually had some micro vibrations that would get into the video. The more I tuned it, trying to get it to where I could control it in my typical sort of flight style. So if you're watching this, you may think, oh, it's a fairly tepid flight. It's not because the machine isn't powerful, it's because it was hard to tune. And as you've already seen, it's got pretty big punch outs, especially for a machine at this weight. Really surprising. Even though I've flown these motors before, I was surprised by that because, well, it's been a while since I've flown these LDARC 1406 3600 kV motors. But it flies pretty well, it's pretty reasonable. I did have one crash that I'll show you back at the desk where I dead centered a tree, and so that's a good thing. The canopy should protect your Caddx Turtle V2 pretty well. At least in my crash, it just turned the camera up. I didn't have the camera just firmly locked down. I had it pretty tight where I didn't have any problems with video. As far as those micro vibrations that can come out in HD video a lot of times. I should mention that I'm also flying on a 550 milliamp GNB battery. I'm not using the skinny version because the skinny version I found that the machine would tilt back and forth, so I used the typical rectangle version that's a little bit wider so it would sit nicely. And I'll talk about the battery strap when we get back to the desk. They had kind of set up the battery strap in a way that I didn't care for, but it is a 3-incher. It is a big, thick bottom plate, although I expect it to be a little bit more stiff to have that sort of thickness. Also, keep in mind that this is the footage that's recorded on the machine. This is not what you see in the goggles. For many of you that have been around quite a long time, you'll know that, so that's old news. But I want to make sure I mention that because I have forgotten in the past, and I don't want somebody buying the product thinking once they get in the goggles that this is what they're going to see. This is not the DJI FPV system. This is onboard recording with a micro SD card. And speaking of that micro SD card, I would suggest you get a high-speed micro SD card because that is going to ensure that your video records nice and smooth. If you use one of the cards that you get that are sometimes free in other things, it's probably not going to record nice and smooth video. Something to keep in mind there. The view in the FPV goggles we'll take a look at here at the back of the desk as we wrap up this footage. Because that view is something that if you haven't seen it before, you do need to see it. And because we don't have the OSD present, the flight time on this 4S 450 milliamp battery is 3 minutes and 14 seconds. This is a little sample, and I didn't clear the camera's OSD. You can do that. It doesn't come with the dongle that you need though, so that's kind of why I didn't clear it, so I wouldn't forget that little detail. The part that I'm talking about is the timer down on the bottom left that shows the time as the run time, and then the Caddx.us, and then also the voltage, which is 4.5 volts down there. I think it's probably just connected to the 5-volt output on the flight controller. But this is what it looks like. You can see the REC in white kind of in the top center, it is showing that we're recording, and we're also getting the red runtime in the top right where we actually have our VTX frequency that shows how long we've been recording. So this is what you see in the goggles. And I will say, now that I've got those new SkyZone 030s, this looks better than I had experienced on my HDOs. I was kind of surprised by that. This is the first time I've flown one of these HD since I started using those goggles on an everyday basis. And this doesn't look nearly as poor as it did previously using my Fat Shark HDOs. So a little note there, you know, most people have Fat Shark HDOs or some other goggles. Those SkyZone goggles, they're good. They make stuff that we thought was bad look better. Although I will say it's not as good as others. It's much better than we've seen in the past with these cameras in their FPV view. So let's start with the battery strap that I mentioned. So they had originally come from underneath here to where your strap only hooked through the outsides, which you kind of have to do, and we'll talk more about that in a second. So the strap would come from this side up through and lay across the top, go back down, and then you loop it across the top. I really don't like that because it doesn't do really anything to hold your battery in place, especially with a strap without a buckle where you can really put some pressure on it. So you have two alternatives. You can use that strap, but then find some rubber gummy mat to put probably on either side of the strap as it runs over the top, and that will definitely help. This should help us if your battery lead is long enough to keep the battery from ejecting, provided that you have it reasonably tight. I do have a bit of a concern about this being mounted to the PCB back here. But, you know, it's unfounded. It's just one of those new things that I like it because it keeps things nice and tidy, especially if you're someone who struggles with twisting your wires and maybe twisting them too much and then you end up twisting them off the battery. You wouldn't have to do that because it's going to hold it firmly here. But if your battery shifts forward and you've got a short lead, will this end up bending or breaking? You can see behind there are some wires. So I do believe the PCB is only holding this in place. And it is firm and goes into this plastic bit up here. So I instead opted to run a thinner strap, and you might wondering why a thinner strap. Well, it's because these are offset. So you have to go between the stack here with your battery strap if you run it like I do. But because they cut this, or the frame aligns off of that stack, I had to find one that was small enough to where I wouldn't be way out here on the arms or something like that. So I ended up going with two of these cheapo depot, which worked. It's just not my preferred method. You know, this part out here, I've connected two of them together. So that was the first kind of hurdle I ran into when getting this ready to fly. The next hurdle I ran into, the binding really wasn't a problem. The manual lays things out fairly well as far as powering the machine and pressing the button on the receiver. It has color-coordinated flashes for which one you're binding to, whether it's D16 or the FHSS. That's pretty clear there. But getting these nuts on is a struggle, and I would suggest that you get one of those wraps that you use to hold onto a jar when you're trying to get the jar lid off. Sometimes you get those free from your insurance agent or something like that. So with the props off, put the nut all the way on first, because it's really hard to get those on even without the prop in your way. Once you get them on, you can get them on and off reasonably well, but that took, I bet you it took me 45 minutes to get all the nuts all the way down and pull them back off before I was ready to put props back on. The tune that it came with, I'll put on screen. It's from the DVR. I failed to take a picture before I started flying it, and then the tune that I ended up with, I'll flash on screen now. They're not dramatically different, but I was more comfortable flying with the tune that I had put on it. Also, these zip ties that we have up here, those are obviously mine. They're blue. There's kind of my trademark blue. I like blue, but the ones that it comes with are really short, or at least in my case, they were really short, and the heat shrink they had over them wasn't really holding anything in place. Long term, I would suggest doing something with this receiver so where it's not moving around. Maybe a little bit of foam tape on it and then stick it to the back of the camera. You know, get your camera angle set where you're going to want it and then foam tape it. We've also got, I think it's a line filter down here. Maybe you can see it. Sorry, I bumped the camera right down in there. I'll get my little pointer out. Maybe I can see it better from this side. This little guy here, I think that's a line filter to help clean up our video. So that's a little nice touch that they added in there. Maybe it was necessary, maybe it was just an extra that they did. They also used some of the wider tape that we've been using on some of our other quads to secure our motor wires down. I do like that stuff. It stays on really well. It's probably the best tape I've found for doing that exact thing is keeping our battery or motor, why do I keep saying battery? Motor wires down. There is no light up front. They have the 90 GTI, which will be coming up. It does have a light in the front. This one does not. So this right up here is your Cadix V2, and it's got the microphone right up here. I'm going to play a little bit of audio, and then when I put the thumbs up, it means that the audio is now off, and you can turn your volume back on if you've heard that before and you don't want to hear it again. Some people might be wondering about the audio quality and if that's any good or not. But generally speaking, in micro quads, it does not sound very good. It's a high-pitched drill or screeching. So here it comes in 3, 2, 1. Okay, we should be back. Everybody should be able to hear again without getting their eardrums blown out. The VTX, the antenna to the VTX, there's a little rubber grommet right in here. You see that's kind of flexible. I've got something crawling on my hand over here. Sorry, I had a bug on my hand. But the VTX has this rubber grommet in here, and I didn't find that comes out, so hopefully that's not an issue if you have one. The canopy that I mentioned previously, I said I don't know why they included that, because it's actually not going to work on this quad, because you can see this stack is going to be much taller than this canopy is going to allow. So this would only work if you took the Cadix Turtle and its board out. I think this is what comes stock on the non-XG version. Also back in here, hopefully you can see it right in here, that is a metal standoff, so this is not supported by plastic, that is metal. I do like the fact that they used all hex-headed screws, so that makes it much easier to get things on nice and tight. Even on the supports across here are hex-headed, and on the camera. I should also show that crash. I should have shown that earlier. This is a crash dead long into the tree that I mentioned during the flight video, and as you see, it hit the tree. I go down. I disarm right away when I crash. It's just something I do. It's something I've kind of done since I started flying, was if you crash, disarm. And I found that I think that has saved me in a number of different instances from either hurting a component or the ESC specifically. But in that crash, all I did was turn the camera up, and that actually came very early on. I do not think it deformed the canopy in any way. Of course, it wasn't a full speed, full on dead center crash. It was kind of maybe 40% on the throttle, maybe 45, and then I hit that tree. But it was solid. Also keep in mind that if you want to replace this camera with something like the Foxeer Mix, it has a longer nose on it, so that is going to stick out further. They have this secondary mounting hole for other cameras. I don't think any of the HD cameras will fit here and give you any sort of camera protection. Your lens is going to stick out from the mount far enough to where if you do center a tree like I did, you'll probably end up with camera damage if you use that forward hole, or if you use a longer nosed HD camera. That might work for other cameras that are not HD, or at least cameras that come down the road. Also, I'd mentioned that I'd already run these motors before. These are 1406 3600 kV motors. I do like these motors, especially on a build like this. They are pretty efficient and actually very, very powerful on a 3-inch, but I think it's these props, and if you look at the props, you might be thinking they're the same, but I just think there's some subtle differences about it that made these props a lot more sensitive to tunes, and your tuning envelope is relatively small. The weight could also be playing a role in that. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.